Okay. Hello everyone, good morning. Welcome to another exciting session with Hack365 Global. Our theme for today's section is Behind the Locks, Cryptography in the Digital Age, Digital Era. In today's section, you will get to explore the power of cryptography. You also learn the principles and the techniques used in cryptography. So ensure you pay good attention to the section. And as always, you get to also have the hands-on experience where you will solve labs on Hack365 Global. So if you are yet to create your account on hack365global.com, kindly do, because you will need it at some point in the section. So to have this access, first of all, you have to create your account on scitechacademy.com and then use the login details on hack365global.com. The details are in the description of this section, so you can check if you missed it. Also, the link to our communities is also in the description, so you can always join for live updates and resources in your learning. So for for those who are interested in handling a section with Hack365 Global, you can always reach out to us at info@hack365global.com. So if you want to handle a section with us, you are welcome to. You can always just send us an email and you will be attended to. For today's section, we have Teddy, who will be taking us through today's section. I'll be inviting him now to take over. See you at the end of the section.
Okay, sorry, I was muted for a bit, so let me just go over what I just said. So I said, welcome to the session, and we're going to be discussing cryptography today. Mainly, the session, as from the title, Behind the Locks, Cryptography in the Digital Era. We want to understand cryptography from a deeper perspective, right? But not too deep. Cryptography is very broad. There are so many areas to cover. But in this session, we're going to focus on just, first of all, understanding some key fundamentals, right? And then understanding some key concepts, such as hashing, faulting, encryption and decryption, and we'll take a dive into how cryptography plays a major role, if not the entire role, that backs TLS, SSL, encryption, right? Encryption over web traffic. So without any waste of time, let's get into it. So first off, let's understand what cryptography is, right? At its core, cryptography is a critical component of cybersecurity, and Just as every other component as well, it involves techniques to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But at its core, cryptography focuses on confidentiality and integrity, right? So these two areas, as we know, confidentiality, meaning that sender and receiver, giver and taker are the only ones who are supposed to have access to that information. It's confidential. Integrity, it is unaltered, regardless of the processes it goes through, how it is kept. The main thing is it is unaltered at all points. So that means nothing changes within that file. So general definition, right? Cryptography involves the principles and methods of transforming intelligible message. When I say intelligible message, what we simply mean is something that makes sense, something that is coherent, something that anybody can understand. We transform that into something that is not understandable, something that is cryptic, something that you won't be able to just decode by looking at it. So, in general sense, at its core, that is what cryptography does, right? So there are some key things to always note when talking about cryptography. There will always be the plain text, which is the original message. And then there will be the ciphertext, which is the transformed message, the message that has gone through a function or has been affected by an algorithm or has been put through an algorithm, which is usually referred to as the cipher, right? So these terminologies are things you're going to hear almost throughout the course. As you can see, the little diagram there, that infographic, it's just trying to give like a process flow as to how um, cryptography happens, right? So first off, ideally, there is a message that the sender would want to send, right? And through here is the security related transformations. We're talking about the what algorithm or the cipher, which converts the message and then sends it through an information channel, right? So usually this channel is to be encrypted so as to avoid, you know, um, so as to avoid the message from being intercepted easily. So there are so many ways that can be done, but for now we're focusing on cryptography itself. So send the message goes to the recipient also who most likely would have either some information, maybe the key to decrypt it, and then we'll have that decrypted and the recipient gets it. And then this process is repeated back and forth for as long as the message communication is ensuing, right? So next, let's talk about some other key concepts and terminologies that will still be will be using in the course of the class. So first of, cryptography has different techniques. So we're talking about block ciphers. This is when you have a fixed length of, let's say, the cipher text itself. Well, it could be stream ciphers. This is continuously done while the stream is happening. And then you have the public key cryptography and algorithm. These are things that we're going to be hearing most of as we are delving into the course. So a key is some critical information used by the cipher, right? And this is usually just known by the sender and receiver. Although this varies depending on the type of cryptography we're talking about. It's encryption, there are some types, and then there are different types of encryption. So when we get to that area, you'll understand why that is different. So and cipher is just simply, let's say, the verbal form of saying, okay, now we want to encrypt this, right? And then decipher is the opposite of that. When you have an encrypted text, ciphering would mean to decrypt it to what would now be understandable, to be able to reveal the actual message that was supposed to be sent. Okay, so more terminologies related to cryptography. We have cryptanalysis, which is the general study on principles of methods of transforming unintelligible messages back to intelligible message without the knowledge of the key, right? So these are, over time, some people have been successful to decoding hashes, to kind of like mapping it back to what the original text was. So these are areas of what you would call cryptanalysis. right? Then cryptology is like combination of both cryptography and cryptanalysis, like the, let's say, superseding term for it. As I explained before, code or cipher is the algorithm that is doing the transformation, right? For people who are versed with mathematics, it is like a function. When a function affects, you know, a certain variable, what now comes out is what we could define as the code itself. So, lastly, to cover the steganography, we won't go deep into this, but in simple terms, what it is hiding or putting messages in somewhere that is not, let's say, in plain sight, right? In simple terms, steganography is hiding in plain sight. So some examples of this would be, or we're not supposed to focus on that today in this class, but there are utility tools on Kali Linux that you can use to embed messages on images or sound files. So what this would mean is I can literally send you a message, but there is a hidden text within it. So it's like hiding in plain sight, and that is what it means in simple terms. Okay, so one of the first things that we want to delve into is hashing, right? Hashing. And what is hashing? At its core, it's a one-way process that converts inputs of any size, right, into a fixed size string of characters, depending on the hash algorithm that is used, right? And then what you get out of that is what you call a hash value or a digest. This is important to know that terminology. Some people refer to it as digest, right? You can also call it the hash value. Some call it the ciphertext. But all of these mean the same thing. So it is important to note that hashing is at its core, it deals with integrity. You need to know, has this message been altered in any way? So if you have, let's say, a document that has maybe 10,000 characters or 10,000 words, or even say 20,000 words, if you include a full stop within that document, the hash value will change. So in summary, the smallest of change to the main file, when you hash it again, you find a completely different hash value. That indicates that integrity has been altered. Something has been done to the file, right? So that's why ideally hashing is more like a one-way process. So when you hash, you can't necessarily dehash or unhash unless there are some other parameters that are not involved. But at its core, like I mentioned before, hashing deals with integrity. So this is an example or like an illustration of why it's one way. You see an apple sliced and mashed into an apple juice. It still contains the same thing, although it's now in a different format, right? So most of the times, all of the time, your passwords are stored in hashes. They're not necessarily stored as plain text as most people would assume, right? So whenever you put in a password, most of the time the operating system is going to include what you call a salt. We're still going to discuss that as we move on. But ideally, this is what a hashing function will look like if it was done on, let's say, material things such as an apple or whatever. So some key properties that are associated with cryptography that are important to note is first, deterministic. What this means is the same input will always produce the same hash. The same input will always produce the same hash, meaning that it is a very functional way to detect if a file has been altered, right? So, because at any point in time, if you put the same input, you will get the same hash, as long as they're using the same hash now corridor, right? There's what you call pre-image resistance. It's difficult to find the original input given the hash. Although, although in the past there have been some few successes of this or in this area, but ideally, or the normal under normal circumstances, it's difficult to find the original input given the hash. It is also collision resistant. And what this means is it's difficult to find multiple inputs, like say different inputs that would now produce the same hash. So just as we spoke about pre-image resistance, also collision resistance. So just as difficult for you to have, or to just as it is sure that you always have the same hash given the same input, it's also certain that it's difficult, if not impossible, where you have two different inputs giving the same hash. So this is useful, like I mentioned, verifying data integrity at its core, ensuring that data has not been altered in any way. So examples of hashing algorithms, you see the SHA-256, which SHA stands for secure hashing algorithm. I'm sure most people would have maybe seen this in one place or the other. The SHA family is very popular. It's mostly used. The message digest MD5, it's now considered insecure by many users due to collision vulnerabilities. They found that multiple different inputs could produce the same hash if you use MD5, and that's why we are most of the time now it's not as used as it used to be before. It was quite popular back in the days, still being used by some people till now, but not as dependable as it used to be. So after understanding hashing, it's also key to understand what salting is. So when you think of salting, think about it like food. I'm trying to relate it to something that'd be very easy to understand. So simply, the salt is added to whatever input that is provided by maybe the user or maybe a process that has been created for that. And then the salt is now determined by um, the salt is now an extra value that is added to like exponentially increase the difficulty or to further increase the security of the hash itself. So that way, let's assume that someone is able to decode the hash, right? Now it is now exponentially more difficult because a salt has been added. So there's a normal input that's given, which is supposed to be given by the user or process or system that has been set up. Then the salt is added during the um, when the algorithm is actually taking effect, right? So the user himself might not even know the salt in some situations. And even on our, I think when we are also demonstrating, we would see the use of salt as well. So the direct definition is secure function, cryptographically secure function that is used to automatically generate a value, which is called a salt. And this value is then automatically added to the input data, right, as data that's coming in, basically the password. So the value can be added either at the beginning or at the end. So you see that the input still remains together. They're not changing the inputs. What the input is not going to be rearranged. The value is still the way it is. So the salt is just added, like either appended at the end of the file, or rather of the input, or at the beginning. So when it's now time to decrypt, it's easy to take out the salt and then have the original inputs back, right? In a situation where we are using a certain function that involves salting as well. So salt, in summary, basically, it's just that added value that's added to the input data, then gets the hash value. So now let's get into encryption itself, right? So encryption at its core is answering to confidentiality, right? So as we mentioned for hashing mainly used to check integrity. But encryption at its core is covering confidentiality. So encryption is the process of converting readable data, which is the plain text, into unreadable scrambled format using an algorithm and a secret cryptographic key. So this makes it understandable only by the authorized parties with the correct key for decryption. So usually encryption involves having a key which is used to encrypt the data, and that key is also used in decryption. But if you're using a certain type of encryption, we're going to discuss about the type of encryption. But in summary, with encryption, you are converting a plain text into ciphertext using a key. And that key is important to also decrypt it. Encryption is not one way, such as hashing. Encryption can be decrypted provided you have the correct key. So, okay. So there are two types of encryption that we'll be discussing today, the symmetric and the asymmetric encryption. And we'll also talk about hybrid encryption. But for symmetric, what you have on your screen is kind of like speaking about symmetric encryption. Um, encryption is used to provide confidentiality only to persons who can or who are supposed to get the data are the ones that are going to get data, and they're the only ones that will be able to decrypt it, given that they are the only ones that have the key. So usually, simple encryptions do not scale, right? And they're hard to do securely. Why? Because of the possibility of your key being exposed. Given it's the same key that you need to use to encrypt, then you have to find a way to communicate that key to who is going to decrypt it. All right. So it's not a very secure way of doing things. Before we talk more on that, let's discuss one very simple type of encryption that has been used over time. The early days, Caesar cipher, which is in its simple term, it breaks down the concept of encryption and simplifies it to something that you can do on a daily basis. Right? So it's a method where letters in the alphabet are changed in terms of position. Right. So this in the early days, I think during the war also, World War I or World War II, they were used to transmit information, given they already knew the encryption parameters of how to reposition the letters to get the actual message that was sent. But at its core, the Caesar cipher, it's a substitution cipher, right? And it works by replacing each letter of the original plain text with a letter or a certain letter that has you only get by moving some certain positions, right? So we're going to get a little bit hands-on on this or with this. I'm going to explain how it is on the basics of it itself. So from the illustration you can see on your screen, the Alice wants to send a message to Bob, and she wants to send it over the internet, right? So Alice, if it was in plain text, let's assume that the traffic is unencrypted. That means the communication channel is porous. Anybody can be on it, right? And let's assume that Tom, which is an evil-minded person, or just somebody who wants to be in the conversation, or who wants to see what Alice is trying to send to Bob, right? So Tom, who's on the internet, has intercepted that traffic and is able to get his hands on the message. So the only thing that Alice was able to do here is to transform her plain text into a ciphertext before sending, right? So let's assume they are trying to put in a password somewhere, and Alice is trying to give Bob the password and sends ABC. But she transforms that to a ciphertext, right? And then the ciphertext is DEF. So Tom, who has intercepted that traffic, does not know what DEF stands for. And that is the whole point of encrypting your information before sending it. So even if it is intercepted, the person would not be able to understand what you have sent. So that is why they say it's unintelligible message that is the result of, you know, a plain text going through an algorithm. So you see, over the internet, Bob gets it back, and then he is now able to transpose the message using the key that he must know. Maybe Alice must have given him that key one way or the other. And that, in simple terms, is how Caesar cipher works. So let's get deeper into it. So there's also a formula that can be used for determining the letter's position, right? An example would be from what you're seeing on your screen. Let's say C, right? C is equal to TK mod 26. So there's no, it's nothing too serious. This is just using the modulo function in mathematics, right? And I'm going to demonstrate it by explaining a very simple example here. You see, these are all of the alphabets, right? But then if you have a Caesar cipher of +3, that would mean that any alphabet that you receive, you have to add 3 to it. For instance, this is A +3, right? B, C, D. So it lands on D. So D, it's now going to be what would serve as A, right? So let's assume that we have a, what do you call it, a day, the name ADE, and we now want to see what it is after encryption. So ADE, after a CSS cipher encryption, becomes DGH. And this is done simply by just moving the characters by the amount of times that is specified here. So in this particular example, the key is 3, right? It's 3. You're moving 3 times. Very simple. And then to decrypt, the same process is done, but in the backwards, or rather in the reverse. So if now you, who is on the other end, has received the ciphertext DGH, you're now going to now transpose it back to the original text, which is ADE. And this was done simply by just going back and forth the amount of times that was agreed. So this can be done with different amounts of shifts. You can have shift 5, shift 10, shift 15, shift 20, right? And that is where this comes in as well. So you add the number of shifts with the total number of alphabets. Or add the number of shifts, right, with the position of the current letter, and then you do the mode 26. So mode 26 is simply division, and whatever the remainder is, that is the actual value you are looking for. So that is what will now represent everything that we have here. Quite simple, but sometimes it could be a bit confusing, right? So if at any point in time you have questions, just make sure you indicate it in the chat or you put your hands up. So I'll make sure to clarify as I move along. So here's another example of this, of +3. So you can see the objective here was to implement a Caesar cipher for the sentence, "I love network security." So with a +3, you can see what we have there. The encrypted results, you can see it's obviously not something you can read, but when decrypted, you get back what was initially sent, and that is done by -3. As I mentioned, the 3 is not static. You can always change it. You can use 5 moves, you can use 10 moves, depending on how you want it. And you can also decide that, okay, for every word, I am switching the amount of moves. But obviously, your receiver or whoever is receiving the message needs to be aware of this, because that's the only way you can successfully decrypt what has been sent. So to delve deeper into the two types of encryption I mentioned as we began, the symmetric and the asymmetric. For the symmetric, we encrypt and decrypt using the same keys. And then for the asymmetric, we encrypt and decrypt using different keys. Where do you explain how the symmetric works? Now, this is an example of the asymmetric encryption. Let's say a pictorial example for us to be able to see, what it looks like in terms of how the characters are changed. So you see, this one, let's assume this is still trying to use the Caesar cipher to like explain asymmetric encryption here. The encryption key and the decryption key are different. So when asymmetric encryption happens, two keys are created, and these two keys are mathematically related. That means they are synced together in such a way that the presence of one can validate the other. So in summary, there's a public key and there's a private key when talking about asymmetric encryption. The private key is always kept private. You never share your private key. But the public key is what is used for communication back and forth by both parties. So let's say person A wants to communicate with person B. Person A has the public key of person B, and person B has the public key of person A. So your public key being out there is not a problem, as long as there is no private key to match it, and that's the only time decryption can actually happen. So whatever encryption wants to be done that's going to be sent out on the public is going to be done using the public key. And then when the recipient gets the message, they decode using their private key. Right. So let me give a this illustration just depicts the completely different nature of symmetric and asymmetric. The symmetric is straightforward. Secret key, decryption key, they are same, right? But for asymmetric, the encryption and decryption key are different, just as I explained. So usually, if you're using the same, let's assume you intercept the traffic, and then you now want to use the same key to decrypt it, it will not work, and it's because of this reason. So let's give another example. Let's say we have Pam and Jim here. So Jim wants to send a secret message to Pam. He uses Pam's public key to encrypt that message. And only correlating private key, that only Palm's private key can decrypt that encrypted message. Why? Because it was Palm's public key that was used to encrypt it. And vice versa. Palm also wants to respond. She encrypts the message with Jim's public key. When Jim receives it, because of his keys are mathematically synced, his private key will be able to decrypt that message as well. So let's look at some of the reasons why, some of the strengths and weaknesses of these types of encryptions as we've been discussing about them. So symmetric, which is the first type we discussed, the one with same key, only one key. it's faster, right? And it takes less compute. So there's low CPU costs on that area. But then the ciphertext is same size as plain text, more or less. And it is less secure because, as I mentioned, the same key that was used to encrypt is the same key that is required to decrypt. So if that key is intercepted, the whole point of the encryption is null and void. But now, its own strength now is that it's faster. You can put large amount of data and it will encrypt it regardless of the size, right? And this is a weakness for asymmetric. Asymmetric is much more secure because we have two keys. But then it requires much more compute, meaning slower, right? It requires even much larger key sizes. It requires much larger key sizes as well. And then another weakness is the ciphertext expansion, right? So because of this, when you are encrypting bulk data, it is ideal to use the symmetric encryption. But when you have smaller type of versions of data, the asymmetric would be more advisable. Although, to kind of balance it all, that is why there's the hybrid encryption. The hybrid encryption is a combination of both. And we'll see that clearly when we start, when we get into LS and SSL encryption. So on this other area, we're just talking about some of the algorithms, popular algorithms that are symmetric and also the ones that are asymmetric. I'm sure nowadays you hardly see DS, RC4, mostly see the AES. AES family is still quite popular. So AES is still a very strong type of symmetric encryption. It has different bit keys. You have the 128, 192, 256. There's also um, the 512. I think that's for SHA. Okay. Then for the asymmetric encryption, we have RSA, DP-Hellman, ECDSA, and the likes. You can see the key sizes for this. We have about 2048 bits. And most of the ones you see in symmetric are, I think the highest I see in symmetric should be 512. But from what you can see here, it's 256. So this is like the pictorial illustration of hybrid encryption. Right? Those are explained. Symmetric has strengths, asymmetric has a strength. They both have their weaknesses. But in hybrid encryption, they kind of complement each other. Right? So in hybrid encryption, the encryption itself is done on using the asymmetric encryption. Then, as it is now being sent over the internet, it is now done with a symmetric encryption, meaning that you can still intercept traffic, you can have the decryption key, but then there's another layer of encryption that is now required to still be decrypted. So it's exponentially more difficult to crack a hybrid encryption. From what we have here, you see the secret key used with symmetric encryption for bulk data, asymmetric encryption facilitates the key exchange, right? So meaning that the data itself is encrypted using symmetric encryption, right? And then to now be able to establish communication, it is done using asymmetric encryption. So now you are no longer you're no longer held back by the limitation of asymmetric when you want to encrypt the data, regardless of the size. So even if you have bulk data, you can still be able to have the encryption done and sent over the traffic securely. Okay, so now let's discuss about the SSL or more accurately TLS type of cryptographic protocols that are associated with this particular type of security. So it's designed to provide more secure communication over computer networks, most notably the internet. So most people still refer to it as SSL, right? But SSL is not really what is there right now. SSL is now deprecated. It's old, no longer in use, but that's the original protocol. TLS is it's more modern and more accurate terminology for it. So both are foundational to internet security. There's security over the internet as you're communicating. That is what mainly um, that is what mainly is in charge of your security over the internet. Just as you know, if you see any website that does not have that S in the HTTP, obviously that is an unsecure site, meaning everything there is in plain text. So there is no secure security to that particular web traffic. So this is what TLS does, right? So we're going to like kind of break down how the security itself, in terms of all of the processes that are involved with communicating between the client and the server, right? So this is just simply showing you that, okay, yes, by HTTPS, we get encrypted connection to whatever server it is. So even if you have a man in the middle for that, over that traffic and it's intercepted, you do not have anything to worry about, ideally. So the same way as, you know, transferring this over HTTP. So sending information to a server over HTTP so that your card number is not the smartest thing to do, because anybody who has intercepted that traffic would see what you have sent. Right? It's just more advisable to make sure that whatever thing that you're doing that is sensitive is always over an encrypted traffic. But nowadays, your brother will even tell you that if you're going into a site that does not have an SSL certificate, it will be flagged by your browser itself. So now to kind of like do a dive into the communication protocol that happens before you are able to communicate to a server back and forth, right? There is a handshake that happens first, the TCP/IP handshake that most people, TCP handshake that most people are used to, a three-way handshake. What it involves is what the SYN, the SYNAC, and the ARC, right? Which then tells you that the connection has been established. We can now communicate. The client sends a SYN, the server responds with a SYN ARC, and then there's another response again to the server with TCP ARC, acknowledging that, okay, we can now communicate fully. Then there's now the client hello. Then there's the server hello, and the certificate verification. The client hello initiates the connection, sending the request to the server and indicating that whether or not that the supported cryptographic algorithm that's also running on the server itself. So the client is giving that information, right? Not here. This happens in this second area here. We have the client hello, then the server also responds, server hello. The server responds with its own SSL or TLS certificate containing its public key and its selected cryptographic parameters. Then there is certificate verification, which, as we know, the certificate is what validates that security protocol, right, on the whatever website it is that you're on. They are certification authorities that ensure the authenticity as well. But the certification verification is also done within that process. Then after that is done, after it's successfully verified, then you now have a session key exchange. So this is where the client generates a symmetric session key and encrypts it with the server's public key, right, and sends it to the server. So this is done here. After you say the server hello, and then there's the key being sent. Right, as you can see that here. And the second stage here. And the key exchange happens after that. And then you have the decryption and session establishment. So now that the server will decrypt the session key using its own private key. Because if you remember, just as we said, the client generates a symmetric session key and encrypts it with the server's public key, meaning it's only the server's private key that can decrypt it, right? And it's going to decrypt it. And from then on, they've established secure communication. Now, secure data transfer can happen. So both parties now use the shared session keys, which is the symmetric encryption, to encrypt and decrypt all further data transmitted during the session. Right? So it's like all of this happens obviously within the speed of light. You won't necessarily know that these are happening, but these are all the steps that go on every time there is a client server communication. Right. So after all of the key exchange has been done, as I said, first of all, we have the three-way handshake. After that, there's a client hello, server hello. We have server also response on public key. There's an encryption, there's key exchange done, and then there's the cipher spec also communicated. That is here. During this stage, when the server decrypts the session key using its private key, then you now have secure communication done here. Later transmission back and forth using that session key that is used for encryption. So now you get to your 365. Give me, let's say, 5 minutes. I'll come back and then we continue. All right. So now let's go to the Hack 365 Global and sign in for the lab. Okay, let me show you how you get to the lab itself. Right. Okay. So go to the intermediate section. Wow. Mhm. We keep going. Mm-hmm. So just to confirm, the process is right when you go again from the home. Let me go through the process again. When you get to the home page, you go to intermediate, then you go to cryptography, then the encryption stroke hashing. Okay. So what we can see here is a file here. Okay, there's a file provided and it's encrypted using OpenSSL salt and with an extra parameter PDKDF2. I think this is a more recent because the older ones are now deprecated. You need to include this with an ether value of 100K. And within its content is direction that leads to the flag. So there is a hint provided which would be most likely used for decryption, then the file link to be downloaded. So first things first is to get the file, right? Okay, so no preview available, download. So you can easily download that. I think it's downloaded. So next is go to your machine and have that there. I think I have to turn it on. Okay, so the file that will be downloaded would have encrypted secret message. So that's the name of the file. So we can easily check through that file. That's, mm, okay, so we have it here. So the OpenSSL we have a pre here. So the command, I think I should zoom this in. Cannot be seen very well. Okay, it is better now. So let's say decrypted. So what we have here is just a simple line of code, right? That would pick up. Let me explain it one by one. So now I have OpenSSL, right? ENC, which is the encryption, but then you now specify the algorithm that we want to use. So right here we're using AES 256 CBC. Then it's also worth specifying that this tag D is to decrypt, right? And then a salt is already because you can also specify no salt, right? If that was not part of the encryption, it should not be part of the decryption, right? You also have to specify no salt. But now salt was included because from our let me go back to from Hack365 is it with salt. So definitely salt was included. So we all know what salt is based on the explanation I gave earlier. So we now have we specify with the ether value of 100,000, right? In so this in you now specify the encrypted file, which what we have here is this, right? Then out, which now specifies the output file. Mine is now what decrypted.txt. Just clear. So when we want to decrypt this, all we have to do is press enter. It's going to ask us for a password. So the password was given here. The password is open to 0. Right, so this is the password that we are supposed to use. I didn't use the password, so it didn't come up. Yep. Open SSL. Let's just that. Since we have it here, 256 BBC, tag D, the 2, ether, 100,000 again, and encrypted.enc with the out file to be decrypted.txt. Then the password, let's hope it works. Decrypted. Let's cut the file to see if we have it. I don't think it did. Decryption did not work as so most likely we got the password wrong. So let's do it again. Encrypted.enc. Let's decrypted 01, so we don't put both of them again. Right. So let's do enter. So we'll do open to 0. Okay, I think this one worked well. Yeah, so let's cut decrypted.01. Decrypted 01. Aha. So now that we've used the correct password, right? So from the content of the file, so this file should be hashed using SHA-256 algorithm, and the last five values of the digest is the flag. So that would be the solution to this particular flag. So let us to do the to hash this file itself, because this file is to be hashed, so it would be the decrypted file that will be hashed, right? So now let's do the SHA-256 sum. So to hash, you just use this command directly, SHA-256 sum, then you specify the file you want to hash. Let's use the decrypted O1. Okay. The last five values here is BE187. I have 10 attempts for this BE1. Let's submit this. Okay, so that was that for that. So to go over what we did again, first off is to understanding the task itself. So the file here was encrypted. This is the OpenSSL. It was specified that they had, it was the salt was included, the KDF2 was included. If you use it without these particular parameters, you would still get an encryption. Let's assume that you want to encrypt using OpenSSL, you will, but it would give you an error prompt telling you that it is not deprecated. Like that particular method is no longer very secure, so it's no longer used like that. So you need to include salt, you need to include the also an these extra parameters that were specified here. And then this specification is also used when decrypting. And it's important to note the password as well, because that's the only way you'll be able to decrypt properly, right? And then what we needed to do was to get the file itself first. And then we downloaded that from the link provided. So after doing that, we went, that's my, okay. After doing that, we access the file, right, by decrypting it using OpenSSL as well. So the command we used was this, same thing, and this is identical to when you want to encrypt. The only difference is that here you can see that we specified tag D, which is specifying that this is a decrypting function. If you didn't do this, if you had just kept this would have been an encryption function. So after this was done, all we needed to do next was to input the password, and we were now able to decrypt it. So after decrypting, what we now got as the content of the file, we decrypted to decrypt o1.txt, right? The first time when we decrypted normal decrypted.txt, but that gave us a bad decryption. Let me cut it so we can see what we got in case you run into this type of errors when trying to solve it. So at decrypted.txt, you see what we got after a bad decryption. But when we now did it correctly, we got the actual content of the file. So this file should be hashed using the SHA-256 algorithm. So you see the algorithm was specified because if that would have kept us on a long thing. Then the last five values of the digest is the flag. right? And if you remember what a digest is, it is what the cipher text or the checksum value that is created after the file has gone through the algorithm. So all we needed to do here was to use the sharp 256 and then we specify the file we wanted to hash, right? And in this situation, it is decrypted o1.txt, o1.txt, and we got this. And the last five values was BE187, which we used as our flag, and that's what gave us the flag. So do we have any questions so far? No? No questions? Okay. That is it. There are no. There are some there. Let me see. Oh, that's this one. The one close to it, a bit side by side. Hmm. Okay. So should be close. Not yet. Okay, yes. I think a question came in that what are we hashing? Hmm. Okay, we should run it again. Okay, so what we did, right, in the first, what we did was to, based on what was requested, let me see. Hmm. So, anti-reduce. Okay. So, yeah. So yeah, for I think somebody asked about us going over it again. So the recordings will be provided, so you can always go through it again to see all of the steps that were taken to get the flag. But just to quickly like summarize over it, what was requested here is that we have a particular file, right? And then it is already encrypted. The file came with a .enc extension, right? And this is very common for when you're encrypting with OpenSSL. So the link to the file here is provided. So all you have to do is get this link that you have here, download it. And when you download it, access it on your terminal. Mm, and in my own area here, this is the old terminal. Hold on that terminal. Okay, so from here, all you have to do is go there. So in my own case, I'm already in the folder where it is, right? So it would come in like this, I think encrypted message.enc, this one. When you have encrypted message.enc, all you need to do here is to decrypt this. So to decrypt this, we use the OpenSSL command that you can see here on your screen, right? So all you have to do is to make sure you specify the file in the and you can specify whatever you want the output file to be. Just make it a .txt. So even if you want to open it later with a file browser, a document browser, will be very easy. So in summary, when you do this, it's going to ask you for a password. The password is provided on the platform itself. So when you use that password, you're going to have a successful decryption. Let me show you how I did that. Put it here. Then you put the password open to 0. Okay, this was not done properly. So you see, I think I kept the wrong password. So you can see bad decrypt. If this happens, just know that you most likely did not put in the correct password. All right. So let's do it again to make sure that we are on point. Now let me make this O2 because we already have O1. Okay, now if you don't have any errors, that means it's successfully decrypted. So when we ls this now, we have decrypted O2, which is the main thing that you are looking for. So when you've decrypted, then you now read through the file. And the best way to do so is just to cut the file. You can cut decrypted o2.txt. So as we reading through the file now, you see the information in there is pointing us to the next thing that we need to do that we will be able to solve the flag, right? And I think it was also provided in the in the information here. Within its content is the direction that leads to the flag. So that was like a pointer, right? And its content is the direction that we're now seeing. So what they want us to do here is that this file, which is the file that has just been decrypted, is to be hashed, right? Using the SHA-256 algorithm. And the last five values of the digest is the flag, right? So to do so, we just have to do we need to hash that particular file. So do not forget the file or however you save the name of the file. Mine now is decrypted o2.txt. So if we do SHA-256 this is to get the checksum value, which is like to hash that file using the SHA-256 algorithm. So then we do decrypted o2.txt. So you can see the last five digits is BE187, which is what we got even the first time that we used. Even the first time that we hashed the file. Well, that's decrypted O1. So this is just to also prove our former point. No matter how many times you hash a particular set of inputs, as long as it is that input, it will always provide the same ciphertext or the same digest or the same hash value. And then the last five values here is BE187. So that was what was used for decryption. So I hope that clears it up. Any other question? Okay. Mm, mm. Okay, welcome. Yeah, we are online already. So next, let us go to the next one. This is done now. We've completed this particular task. Only if you're following online. Okay. We kind of went over hashing and encryption, and we just did one of the labs on there. So now I think we want to move on to the second one. Okay. So this is decrypting row 13. Use Cyber We can use Cyber. But before I do that, I prefer to use the Aha. Let's use that one. But I prefer to use the terminal for this. So let's try the echo for this. And then we are translating it with, I think I have that here. We are, I hope you all can see what I'm doing. We have AZ, ZZ dash A, and this should not be much of a problem. AZZ. Then we have mode 26. Okay. I need to confirm something. Yeah. From point Z, NZA, NZA, and then have N, Z, M, yeah, it's here, and hopefully this works. Oh, I think I have an issue here. Here, open the terminal again. Mm. Small again. Yeah, you can. Is the square now, right? Square enough, isn't it? Right? It should be visible enough. You know, you know what they are seeing. This is full normally. This one is just what we are seeing. Mhm. Okay. So let's just use Okay. So now we finished the first lab. So this second lab is we're simply trying to decode a let's say a ciphertext already, but this was done using ROT 13. So there's a simple way to Okay. Oh shit. We're exhausted or this thing here. Okay. Let's just go back home. Friends. So right here we see this page that opens upon clicking the link, this particular one right here. So what you can do is, so this tells us, this is a HTML file. It says, welcome to Caesar Cipher title, and the body goes, oops, something went wrong. Then we have the actual Caesar Cipher in it, and there's nothing suspicious here or is there. So what we can do is take a copy of the Caesar Cipher. See, we go to our decrypting tool or cyber check. We can, no. Okay, we could. Okay, we could paste that input and let's try using the magic feature. This tells us matching operations from base 85, valid UTF-8, entropy of 4.4.5. So this from base 85, if we look up base 85, so we are taking this, we want to believe this is base 85 and we want to take it to the normal base. So we're looking at from base 85, not to base 85. So if we do this, we have this, and this doesn't look good. So definitely this is not how to go about it. So we'll just look up a Caesar cipher to Caesar cipher decoder and see what we could. Okay, so we have this tool. So this is supposed to help us decode Caesar cipher. So what we'll do is we'll paste our cipher text right here. We'll paste it right here. This is plain text. But since the Caesar cipher, would take shifts for it. So can start with a +1. We don't have nothing meaningful +2, nothing meaningful +3. Tells us something. The first flag is SISEC1. Rot-T is equals to Rot13. So if we get this correctly, it means the flag for this challenge should be this.
So if we come back here and paste our flag, we get a negative, and I believe that's because we're asked to submit our flag in base 64. So it means we have to take that back to CyberChef and now paste this in, and we're going to be converting this from base 64. So if we do that, sorry, to base 64. So if we do that, we have this. So we can just do take a command, control of this. And we have a success. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. So what we did was to first things first identify this is the cipher here, and this cipher, upon trying, found out it was not a base 85 like it's mentioned here. Since it's an actual cipher, we use the Caesar cipher encode and decode, which is an open source tool, and we randomly shifted it from 0 down to +3, and we're able to find the flag. So the possibilities are endless because we could do that to whatever number we wanted. And I believe we could also do that the negative way also if we do -3. Okay, now -3 is not the same as +3. That's why we're having a different figure. So that explains that. So we'll move on to the second cryptography challenge. Says the value in curly brackets of scenario 1 is a decryptor for this scenario 2. Okay. So what we could do is we have it from hacker@unknown.com to you@science.ng subject, and every other thing is encoded. So what we could do is to copy all of this and find the root 13 of everything, because that's the instruction. So just find the root 13. Okay. It says, so this tells hello instigator, please decode the attached message carefully. Simple ones, you know the trick. Hint is the key from the home flag. The factor log is sysec -eyk is that. So this should be our flag. This should be our flag. Although something right here doesn't make sense. So this should be our flag. It tells us to submit in base 64, also like the previous challenge. So we can just identify your base 64 to base 64, and then we have this. But then, like I said earlier, something doesn't make sense because we have sysec2 brought, I think, EYK-0x42. So I want to believe this is a decoy. So EYK should be KEY, which is key. It's more of a scramble to have a wrong flag. And if we do that, if we copy this, we should have, oh, where did it go to? paste this. Hope we do not have a space right there. Have a success. Have a success message. So this what? You cannot hear me. I should be louder. That's even finished, sir. But I'm not with two of them. So this basically was quite an easy one like the previous one. We just had to decode the whole bunch of text and then give us the flag. Well, the flag had a decoy inside of it, so we had to correct that and then change it to base 64. And that was how we were able to find the actual end flag for this particular challenge. So now we'll leave room for questions and questions, yes. While we navigate through. Who's this? Christina. I should talk again, you're not hearing me. So, can you hear me now? Please confirm that you can hear me. You can. There's no difference in how I was talking before. Okay, so for the very first challenge, we had the Caesar cipher or the Caesar.html file, and this took us to this file itself that had the cipher embedded inside of its body. So all we did was copy the cipher itself, and upon copying the cipher itself, we took it to our cyber chef, where we identified that the magic combination was not going to work for it. And since this was the magic told us this was from base 85, but this didn't work for it. So all we had to do was take it to our cipher tool itself and then use this open source tool to decode this particular cipher with a shift. And because we didn't know the exact shift number, we had to do it serially. So we went from the first shift to a second shift, and then finally the third shift that showed us the value of the flag, which here it says the first flag is SciSec. Rot key equals rot 13. Use this for the next secret. So we identified that this was our first flag. And then we took this guy and brought it back to our cyber chef. And then we swapped it back to base 64. And then right on base 64, we got the base 64 encoded format of our flag and then submitted it on our Hack365 because that was the instruction given. And then for the second one, for the second challenge, we took the whole text as seen here and decoded it. And then this decode basically had this guy as the actual bone of contention here to be a rot 13 encode. So we just used rot 13 to just pick and drop. And upon picking and dropping, we found the actual flag. when the flag seems to have been a decoy because of the syntax. So what we did was to paste it back and correct it by changing the EYK to a KEY. And then we took this from now error 13 to a base 64. To a base 64. And then now we found the final flag in the base 64 format, which we submitted on Hack365. So, and then we got, calm down. One error. Okay, I think probably because we've answered it the first time. Because we've gotten it already. Anyways. So yeah, that's basically all for the challenges. Questions can come in now. Questions. Any questions? Yeah. It's an EYK. So most times, exactly. So most times, the idea of cryptography is to have decoys. So sometimes you might even have decoy flags. And you actually try to break cryptographic text ciphers sometimes. So some flags exist in ways that sometimes you would have to, for example, do error 13 more than once. So if you notice on your cyber chef, you have the ability to do so many decryptions at the same time. The reason is because some ciphers are created in such a way that they are supposed to be combinations of others. Yet, so it's more like you having a mentality of, oh, something can be a decoy at any time. So from the first onset, when we used the EYK, it didn't work. So I believe that was where the decoy came from, EYK. So it should be KEY, because KEY makes more sense than EYK, key instead of EYK. Yes, just more like a probability that actually works. Exactly. So it's not like it's always like that. If that didn't work, we might have tried something else. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, so that's the reason why we did that. Yeah. Yes, maybe. Yes, you can keep trying. That's why it's cryptography. Can keep trying. Yes. We could try something else. Yeah. So another question. What? On the live. No. Huh? Question. Yes, sir. No. No questions anymore. So the absence of questions, I think we can wrap it up.
This is why feedback is always important. So, we spoke about some of the terminologies as well. Cryptanalysis, cryptology, what an algorithm is, and steganography, hiding in plain sight. Then we spoke about how hashing is one way mostly used to check file integrity. It's how most of your passwords are stored, hashes are compared before you're authenticated and all of that. And then we went into like giving an illustration as to how hashing is mainly one way, and when the function is placed, you get the hashed context or the hash value. Then we spoke about some key properties of cryptography: deterministic, pre-image resistant, collision resistant. So in this area, we're just trying to let you know that the same input will always provide the same hash. It's difficult to find an original input that would. It's difficult to find an input from the hash. So just as we explained before, it's a one-way function. Usually just to check the integrity of the file. And then it's collision resistant in such a way that it's very difficult that two different inputs will give you the same hash. If you're using the same algorithm, that's completely unlikely. And then we now spoke about some type of hashing algorithms, the secure hash algorithm, the SHA-256, which is one of the most popularly used, the MDs, but those ones are more deprecated right now because of are not as secure as they used to be. So next is salting. We spoke about how a salt is to be added to the input data to just exponentially increase the difficulty of trying to crack it, right? And it gives a more secure, let's say, output than without a salt, right? Then we now went to the encryption proper, gave a definition, which the difference between encryption and hashing is hashing at its core answers integrity. Encryption at its core answers confidentiality. So I'm encrypting with a specific key, and this is going to only be decrypted by the person who will receive it. And then we gave some illustrations to show how encryption happens. Different algorithms give you different outputs. Then we spoke about Caesar cipher, which mainly just is transposing the position of the letters to be able to get the value. And we delved into that a bit more by showing the letters, and then giving the actual formula for, in case you are trying to find the actual input that was given. Given the amount of shifts, you can use this formula to deduce it. We also gave some examples of which we actually broke down how this I love network security was transposed to this, and then how we can get that back after decryption. Then we spoke about two types of keys, two types of encryption, mainly symmetric and asymmetric. And we explained that symmetric, it's one key, that is public key alone. That is what is used by both encryption and decryption. But asymmetric has two keys. So there's the public and the private key. Public key is used to encrypt the receiver's public key is used to encrypt the data so that when it is sent, the sender would encrypt the message with the receiver's public key. The receiver's private key will now be used to decrypt the message, and the person will be able to have access to the message. So we now spoke about how asymmetric encryption is not like symmetric. Where symmetric, the same way you encrypt is the same way you decrypt. In asymmetric, it is different because they have different keys. And we broke that down using like an illustration, as you can see. Then we spoke about hybrid keys, hybrid encryption rather, which encompasses both public and private, both symmetric and asymmetric, meaning that in that when you're using hybrid encryption, you first of all encrypt using the symmetric,
And then for key exchange, you now use asymmetric. That way, you're able to utilize the strengths of both types of encryption. And then we went down to speak about some types that are used daily. And we delved into transport layer security, which is also popular known as the SSL, which is the security protocol for, most of the time in summary web traffic, when you're trying to communicate on the internet. This is the type of protocol, security protocol, that is embedded within. So, HTTP, this is unprotected, this is protected, it's encrypted, meaning that it is not traveling in plain text. Then we now broke down each step of the TLS, transport layer security, how it works at the back end. So first of all, there's a TCP handshake. Then there's a server hello. There's a client hello first. Then there's a server hello. Certificate verification. Then session key exchange, decryption, and then you now have session establishment. Then there's now secure data transfer. All of what is explained is illustrated in what you can see on your screen right now. So this was the end of the theoretical aspect, then went hands-on. The first lab we did was on Hack365. All of the labs were on Hack365. So the first one was basically on decoding and then encoding. We had to download the file, decrypted the file using the key that was provided. Then we now had to hash it using the SHA-256. We got the last 5 values, which was the value for the first lab. And the other labs had some other encryption and decryption challenges that we solved. So this kind of gives an introductory kind of like fundamentals into understanding cryptography in terms of hashing. And cryptography is very broad. There are a lot of things that you can do under cryptography, but mainly the ones that are mainly and mostly used is hashing and encryption. So we've been able to answer most of the questions. I think all of the questions, if there aren't any, that brings us to the end of the session.
Okay, thank you, Sadiq and David, for a wonderful section today. I don't know if the online participants has any other questions. If you have any other questions, please drop in the comment section. I don't think you have any other questions. Right. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's practical section. For those of us who missed out from the beginning, you can always replay this live section. It's on our YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to always get live updates Before we end the section, we have an announcement to make. Now I'll be handing over to Mr. Victor, the founder of Hack365 Global.com.
Security protocol that is embedded within unprotected is not structurally set. We now take down each step.
Hello, everyone. How are we doing? Okay, so well done, everybody, and welcome to today's session. I'm Victor by name, and we just want to do an announcement to the public. It's going to be brief and as straightforward as possible. So, after months of covert planning, strategic development, and tactical simulations, Hack365 Global is proud to announce the official launch of our most ambitious initiative up to date, Operation Cyber Shield 2025. So I will be sharing my screen with everyone. Okay, we'll do that later. So Operation Cyber Shield 2025, and it's going to be a 30-day CTF mission, deployment commencing from October 1, 2025. So 30 days, 30 missions, one global battlefield. Both the frontier and fortress, we are calling upon all cybersecurity enthusiasts, warriors, ethical hackers, and the digital defenders from across the globe, Africa most especially, to engage in an unprecedented simulation of real-world cyber learning and gaming time, with several simulations that will be coming up this October. So our keyboard becomes your weapon, your code, your shield, where we're going to be practicing and learning cybersecurity, various aspects of cybersecurity. This time around, encoded into several missions and tasks, just like we have on our various Hack365 accounts. So the mission is simple. We're going to be conducting recon, learning about breaches, vulnerabilities. We're going to be practicing how to extract data, and of course, it's for education and educative purposes only. So it's going to entail red team, blue team, and they're going to be learning different means of how cybersecurity works, how to protect ourselves, how to protect our personal devices, how to protect our various organizations. As we all know, October every year is the Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So cybersecurity in the month of October and all time all around the it's a shared responsibility. So we're going to be competing amongst ourselves, carrying out and engaging in different tasks. Same time, as much as possible, we'll be climbing our way up the leaderboard based on points we're going to be any points you're going to be achieving by time. So the next question is who can join? This is open to anyone anyone that is into cybersecurity, whether you're a student, you're a professional, you're a beginner, you're a seasoned operator, or if you've got the mindset, you're clear to deploy. Okay. So deployment date starts from 1st of October 2025, and the mission briefings will be delivered on daily basis. Challenges will also escalate. Intel will be scarce, time will be limited, and only the most skilled and persistent persons will survive the full 30-day, challenges. So the details for registration, deployment starts from 1st of October, like we mentioned earlier, and everything will be happening. Some details already on Hack365 Global. So if you don't have details yet, you can simply visit hack365global.com/events and get a glimpse of all of the things we'll be doing come October 1st to October 31st, October 30th of 2025. So spots are limited. Lock in your position, get engaged, and this is more than just a CTF. It is more of a global cybersecurity awareness campaign where we are going to be testing various challenges, testing for various types of cyber attacks, phishing attacks. We're going to be getting awareness and educational content on how to keep ourselves and our organizations safe from these type of threats and attacks as they occur. So will you answer the call? Will you rise as a shield for the digital future? Operation Cyber Shields 2025. The mission begins October 1st, 2025. Be ready and you can begin to clear your calendar. It's going to be on and live around the clock 24/7. So you can always fit in depending on whatever be your schedule. So any other challenge you would want to, any other information you would want, you can feel free to reach out to us and we'll be glad and happy to answer them. So simply train hard, learn smart, and in the future. Thank you all and do have a great weekend.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Victor, for the announcement. Let's all look forward to October 2025. All right, for more details, always check out our social medias, and for inquiries, you can send us an email at info@hack365global.com. And as earlier stated, if you want to join our group, the community group on WhatsApp, the link is in the description. So check out the description and just join. Thank you all for joining us today. See you in the next section. Have a lovely day. Bye.